there's an escape route just to the right or just to the left, or a little modification, and the person says, no, I'm just going to keep doing this thing, smashing my face against the window until I die.
Alarm clock in the morning? Are you just like, oh my gosh, snooze, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, I can't take it? And then even then when you have to get up, are you like dragging yourself out of bed? It's not supposed to be like that. That is a sign
and
that
the one thing to be
something's
very
not
aware
right.
of it is diagnosis. When you actually look at what that word is, first of all, it has die in it. And the next word that's hidden in there is gnosis. So this inner knowing.
Because that's how it happens.
Wisdom
the
that
change from one reality tunnel to another is rapid.
We have ancient stories that are stored in our salt, and those stories are constantly reaffirmed.
I don't
we have
care
ancient
what it
stories
is.
that are.
I trust Heidi and Thaddeus, but I
Your
trust
modern
Heidi
work
and
life
Thaddeus.
is designed to keep you busy. Have you eating foods that make you feel tired, lethargic, and give you just enough energy to feed it to the monster corporation? We're kept moderately sheltered and addictively entertained, and of course passively obedient enough to keep doing it. Do you long for something more but don't know where to start? These corporate escape artists have broken free from the ordinary. They walk unfrequented paths. They break pattern, and they've broken free. Fix your finances, hack your health, and unlearn the lies keeping you stuck in the matrix. Welcome to the Corporate Escape Artists Podcast. Welcome to another day in the corporate matrix, everybody. Today we have a very special guest with us. Christa Rymal is here from The Point Retreats. And both Heidi and I have known Christa for many years and done many retreats with Christa. We've attended retreats. We've run our own retreats at Christa's space, and we've been invited to Christa's retreats as guest presenters, speakers, and instructors. So we have a long history of working side by side with Christa through some stressful situations and really fun situations, as well as Christa has remade herself from a corporate healthcare worker into an entrepreneur that she is today. So we're really excited for you to hear her story of getting out of the corporate space and starting her brand new business a number of years ago and where she is today. I know a lot of people that listen to this podcast, Christa, are interested in how the heck do I get out of my corporate job and do anything else and also make some money while I'm doing it? And what else is there to do? So a lot of people are stuck in their corporate jobs. They don't know what else there is available to them because a lot of us grew up and it's like, what do you want to be when you're older? And it's like, policeman, fireman, businessman. Like, we don't even know what all the jobs are that are out there. And so many of us, like you, we go into the corporate world and we do the things we've heard about. I want to be a nurse or a doctor, right? And maybe that's a little bit of your story, maybe not. And then we find out like there's all these other things we could have done and no one ever told us about them. And so it's really exciting to learn about how people, at least to me, how people have moved from this world of what everyone knows there is to do, firefighter, nurse, doctor, engineer, to what it is people really do in the world. So really interested in hearing your story because I haven't even heard all of it. And Heidi and I are extremely interested in bringing those stories to all of you who are listening to this podcast so that you can see what else there is out there and all the success stories of people that have either escaped corporate without quitting their jobs or completely left the corporate world and started something new and exciting. So welcome, Christa. We're excited you're here.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate being here.
So, Christa, we as humans love stories. And I think that's something, like in our ancestry, there has been, the storytelling as an art. And so we love to start the podcast with a story. And I think that sharing that experience, like from the heart space is really compelling. So our question for you is, what is one of the worst moments that you had in your corporate healthcare experience?
It's a big question to start with, but I like it. It's a good question. So I'll start by saying I'm a really optimistic person, but the story I'm going to share was a pretty dark day in healthcare, and it was in a hospital in the Twin Cities area, which is actually probably one of the better equipped hospitals in terms of staffing and supplies. But we had a particular really tough shift one day. And I was charge nurse, so it was the third floor of the hospital. So it was med surge, telemetry, and ICU. And we had started this kind of new staffing, and it was working 7 days on, 7 days off, 7 days on, 7 days off, which sounded really nice on the 7 days off, which is why I took it. I'm like, well, that's great. And there was a couple of other staff members that were following a similar pattern to my schedule. One of them being a nurse, probably about my age, late 20s at the time. And I could tell she was struggling a little bit. And a few of us had tried to mentor her and do some coaching. And just, I think the demands of the job were really tricky. And all of us by day 6 or 7 after working in a hospital for that many shifts were just pretty like maxed out. So here we were on day 7, our last shift of our kind of week long of being on. And this particular nurse did not show up, which was very out of character for her. In general, that just doesn't happen a whole lot in healthcare. You know, at least you have the common courtesy to call in if you're not going to be coming to work. And time went on, 15 minutes passed, 30 minutes passed. So I called human resources and I said, this particular nurse has not shown up for her shift and I'm just concerned. It's out of character for her. What are our options? And collaboratively, we decided that we should probably, notify a family member, tried to notify a family member, could not find one. And then eventually we ended up calling the police to do just a well check. And unfortunately, when the police went there, they found that this nurse had taken her own life, and they found that a self-inflicted gunshot wound. And it was like, I still get chills when I'm talking about it. So it was devastating to just lose a colleague, a teammate, and just a young, brilliant woman who was really at the start of her career. And already the demands of the job were just really too heavy, too much, and not a lot of support. And her resilience was, obviously quite low, probably for both personal and professional reasons. But it led her at the age of 28 to take her own life. So that was a really challenging process to work through the team. We have a whole floor full of patients who are also very sick and often, battling life and death scenarios. And we just had to put on these game faces, even though we knew we had just lost one of our own, and kind of keep carrying on. And it was a really tough scenario because I realized not only did I was young myself. I didn't really know exactly how to handle that and navigate that. The leaders even above me, this was all new for them. So I watched leadership from, kind of mid-level to upper level just struggle with how to reconcile this situation, learn from it, do better, support her family. And this was the hardest day. Actually, that was the second hardest day. The hardest day was this one. So we had her celebration of life. And then myself and a number of our colleagues were still scheduled to work in that evening in the hospital. And so we show up for work after being at her celebration of life, which was obviously very emotional and taxing. And we show up at work and I got our, list of staff members. And I'm like, we're short-staffed. And they said, yes. Which is not uncommon in the hospital. But I'm like, do you realize that we just buried one of our team members? And I literally have shown up to work and we're short-staffed. Could you maybe short-staff somewhere else? Could you maybe call in an agency nurse? Could you maybe do anything just to show that you care, that we're struggling ourselves and we need more support, not less? And it was at that moment that I was like, wow, this system is really, really broken. And the remedy to that evening was, and someone had good intentions, but we got pizza delivered. And I was like, that was almost insulting. Like, it almost would have been better if you would have not sent that, because now it really feels like such a trivial token. And I understand and appreciate your intentions. And yet it was such a miss. And I was like, we are all just speaking such different languages right now. And we're all constantly, in the face of life and death. And of course, there's times you do it well and times you learn how you could have done it better. But it was just such a miss on every level.
That's a really rough story. And it's like the pizza is like, oh, we'll just give you a pizza to say like, this will solve everything. Yeah. And that's not how it works. And it seems like it felt pretty disingenuous on how they thought they solved the problem. So is that like the leadership of the unit? Is it hospital leadership? Is it like, how did that get decided for short staffing the group and trying to do the pizza thing to make everyone feel better? Like, who decides those things?
Yeah. There was probably multiple people in the mix. And again, intentions were good. Everyone was depleted. The hard part, though, is, upper leadership gets to go home and recover and recuperate. And not that they don't have stressors that I probably didn't at the time, but I still had to stand there and lead this whole team of like 25 staff members to take care of other patients who are dealing with life and death. And so, it was probably some human resources, there's always a staffing department. And I don't know how privy they were to understanding what our particular floor had just gone through. So maybe they didn't know. I mean, I'd like to give people the benefit of the doubt. So there was probably, a few pockets of staffing and leadership that just missed an opportunity. Just as unfortunate, it's one of those that, here I am still talking about it, right? 25 years later. So it was impactful for all of us there. And I think it was that message of, felt like how little we mattered, really, to be quite frank. I don't know how to better say that than it just felt like we were in this factory and like, well, sorry, we can't do anything about it. And I'm like, no, there are things to do about this.
I get this a lot in the corporate world, and it's very strange, this like, you don't really matter that much sort of feeling. And there was one specific instance to me. So you tell the story from 25 years ago, and let me think, this was 2004 for me. Yeah. So 20 years ago. Yeah. It's 2024 now, if you're listening to this whenever. Yeah. And so 20 years ago, I was in a pharmaceutical plant. I was one of the engineers developing the manufacturing processes for things like Pepto-Bismol and Dayquil and NyQuil, right? Yeah. So it's like these giant batches, and it takes a pretty well-trained staff to make these batches and run the equipment. So I was helping develop the process, and then all these basically plant staff would make the product every single day. And I was sitting in a meeting with the staff in the batches. So we were like in the manufacturing plant around all the equipment, everyone's bunny suited up. And the management came in and said, this is what we need to do. And we need to work extra shifts to make this product because we have a huge order at this point. It was for Walmart. And some people were starting to complain like, well, I've got family and I need to do this and I have these plans. And they said, this was a quote from the management: "You all are a dime a dozen. We can replace you at any time. So show up for work." And how does that motivate people in any way whatsoever? And you kind of hear these things if you're outside the corporate world, or even some people in the corporate world have been lucky enough never to hear or experience this, which is great. But I firsthand experienced something like that. And I just thought to myself, like, I was an engineer at the time. I wasn't in management. I thought if I'm ever in management of any company, like I will never, that is something I would never do. I will never treat people this way. It's so insane that this is what can happen and that's how flippant some of the management happens to be.
Yeah. I mean, as you know, there's so many different leadership styles, and that's kind of what I had to do with that lesson eventually, and go, you can learn a lot from people who you want to emulate and be like, but you can probably learn even more by people you don't want to be like. And this particular hospital had actually some phenomenal leaders. So it's not that everybody in leadership was bad. It's just, it was new and no one had gone through this. And instead of pulling together, we just there was just a quiet divide there in that moment where it was like, okay, we get it. You actually don't really understand us, or it felt like didn't care. But when you feel like you are just a factory worker showing up, and I mean, we're all educated individuals who have a high degree of passion and purpose in what we do. And you're like, oh, but now I'm just this. I see it. And it's like, it's just hard to not let that hit your ego and just your whole sense of purpose and well-being.
Yeah, and how well is that person going to show up to work and do a great job when they feel like they don't matter?
I know. So do people walk out in the store? I'd have been like, I'll see you later.
They went right back to work, and I'm sure the morale was awful.
Yeah.
And I know that there's a lot more problems in the factory after that happens.
Sure.
So in production, when you're making these big batches and running 24/7, things happen and mistakes are made, and there's always more mistakes after something like that. And it makes no sense to me that would happen. So Christa, you're telling stories. So you obviously worked in a hospital. Mm-hmm. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, how you got into what you used to do, and then why you decided to leave that and do something else.
Yeah, good question. So I initially actually got a degree in psychology and planned on going on to get my master's and being a psychologist or possibly even a psychiatrist. And then kind of through these different changes in life, I had a sister who was a nurse, and she's one of my favorite humans in the world. And she was like, if you want something that's really flexible and you can travel and always have a job, nursing is a great profession. And I had a few other nurse mentors, and I decided to apply for nursing school, went back and got a second undergrad degree. And then started my career in a local hospital here, and was in patient care for 5 years. And I mean, I love patient care. I love taking care of patients. I'm an Enneagram 2. I'm a natural caretaker. But pretty early on in my career, about 6 months in, I was marked in different leadership roles, and I got pulled into leadership roles pretty quick. So started as being a charge nurse, went on to being a primary care clinic supervisor, eventually went on to get my master's in healthcare leadership. And I was being coached. I mean, and I had a drive to probably, look at a C-suite position in a hospital or healthcare system someday. And when I finished my master's, I went on to become the director of endocrinology and diabetes care for 4 hospitals and 28 clinics. We had about 40,000 patients that our team of endocrinologists, primary care docs, registered dietitians, registered nurses, and on were responsible for taking care of. And I loved this job. Like it was fantastic. Great team. I felt like we had an opportunity to make a lot of impact. When I started, there was a lot of excitement because I was trying to bring in a lot of lifestyle medicine, which is a really good fit when you're caring for individuals with diabetes. And we had a lot of great momentum. And then after about a year of using up this grant to support some lifestyle medicine initiatives that we had, we were the first hospital that sought out a disease management class in a kitchen. So we went to Cooks at Crocus Hill, and we developed a whole program where we invited all the physicians in, we invited family members, we invited patients, and we just all worked together, and it was centered around food as medicine. Not that we didn't talk about medication, but a lot of medication to treat diabetes has to be timed with food appropriately. So it was just all this great merger of Western medicine, immersed in lifestyle medicine. And it was a really exciting time, to be honest. And then my dad became quite sick. In the same time as my mom also was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So I had 2 parents diagnosed with terminal illnesses, and I was working probably 60 hours a week, and I had 3 kids. And I was like, this is probably something's going to give. And quite frankly, it started to be my own health. Like I was like, all right, my tank is on empty and I have to give somewhere. And I made the really hard decision to actually leave my job. I took a leave of absence, and I decided to take care of my dad as full-time as I possibly could. And he wasn't always in the same state, so I had to do a lot of running back and forth. And always assumed I would go back. I think everyone assumed I was going to go back. I really didn't leave to leave. And then in the process of looking at medicine from a patient family member side of things, I just saw it through a different lens. And I want to state, I love medicine. I love healthcare. Most of my best friends are still working in healthcare. I have such an admiration for them. But at the same time, it's a really broken system. And I think we have to start looking at it for what it is. And it's really a sick care system. And we all probably are going to need sick care at some point. If I break an arm or end up with cancer or get in a car accident, I am so glad that all of my colleagues are still there working. But it doesn't really drive health. And I was really on the pursuit of trying to see what we could do to get my dad back to a better baseline of health. And it was like constantly just, battling. And there was just elements of neglect even in his care. And I was like, gosh, I'm like, is this as good as we can make this? Like, really? Because I feel like we could do so much better at so many different touch points there. And so when my dad subsequently passed, I was on a long walk with my sister shortly after he passed away. And I'm like, I just feel like I'm called to do something different. And I remembered a last conversation I had with my dad. And my dad was a really good leader. So my dad was the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. So it was hard for him to see me leave because he knew I was his kid who had a lot of leadership drive. And there was a part of him that was like, oh, but I want to see you be a CEO someday. And then there was a part of me that was like, I had that same goal for myself. So it was hard to step out. And yet I learned so much in the process. And he said to me, one of our last conversations is he's like, I really don't know what you're going to do. He's like, but it's going to make an impact. And I was like, okay, I'll just take that. So I'm not really sure what I'm going to do either, but I'm here for as long as you need me. And then as I was talking about, shortly after he passed, my sister and I, who's a functional medicine nurse practitioner, we were on a long walk. And I just said, I feel like I have an opportunity to do something different that can make a bigger impact in healthcare. And then at the same time, my sisters and I were kind of granted with taking care of this beautiful property that our parents had passed on to us, the Point Retreats, which you guys know quite well. You got married there, as a matter of fact. And I looked at it as a great gathering space to do a lot of different work, but really centered more on preventative health than reactive medicine. And so we invited in a lot of different healthcare professionals into the space, biohackers, health enthusiasts, and we hosted a number of, different retreats on the peninsula there for 7 years. And everyone was a little different. Everyone was exciting, but it was, it felt intrinsically right in a way I'd probably never really fully felt inside healthcare, even though I love being a nurse. I loved being a healthcare administrator. This just offered me some different freedom and autonomy to not be so confined by what you're confined to inside healthcare walls, I guess I would say.
So you left the healthcare industry to take care of family members, specifically your dad first, and then you never went back.
No, I've never gone back. So I'm not sure what that says, but I still think, I still believe I'm making an impact because I try and draw in a lot of healthcare professionals who ironically, and so few people don't realize this, they don't have a space to often feel like they can safely care for themselves, especially in more non-traditional healing ways. All of us, can, in the United States, fortunately, most of us have reasonable access to Western medicine care. But for those other modalities that can offer more prevention and more healing, healthcare professionals honestly don't have a lot of access, permission, confidence. I don't know what you want to call it, but I tried to normalize that it's okay to look at things, a little outside the box. So I built up just enough trust in the industry to have people kind of go, okay, well, if she's doing it, there must be a little something to it. And so their curiosity would often bring them in, and then we would have great speakers and staff there to kind of greet them and, make them feel really comfortable exploring whatever they felt called to explore.
And you mentioned lifestyle medicine. So is that part of what you offer through the Point Retreats to some of the medical and non-medical professionals? And what is lifestyle medicine?
Yeah. So, it's at this point, it's just embedded into our programming, right? So we don't necessarily always even have to call it out, but we have different spots where we emphasize it. But we always have health and wellness chefs who cook, fabulous food, really well-rounded macro, micronutrients. We, prioritize helping people get good sleep. We prioritize getting outside in nature. We prioritize, doing things to really calm our nervous systems that, often for all of us, and especially those in healthcare, it's usually...
It's like the opposite of healthcare. Because I just remember, I've learned all this stuff in the biohacking space about light and sound and nature. And we ended up going to the emergency room, 3 or 4 years ago for Heidi when she got stung by a bee. She got stung by a bee and she was having an anaphylactic reaction, and we didn't know she was allergic, so we didn't have an EpiPen. Yeah. So we rushed to the hospital, and it was evening, so it was getting dark. And then we come in, and it's like there's chaos, there's lots of noise, there's super bright lights, And I'm just thinking, like, some people have to sleep overnight in these rooms, and there's sounds of beeping and people running up and down the hallways, and the lights are so bright, like no one could sleep. There's no windows in any of the rooms that we were in. So we were in this windowless room full of bright lights, and we just started turning lights and equipment off because like I didn't ask for permission. But like, that's what happens in these hospitals is like, they're what you said, sick care systems. And so you get sick and you need care. And so that's where we go, is we go to these, healthcare spaces. We call them healthcare, but they're really not building our health. They're taking care of us when we're sick. And from what I've experienced, they're not designed to bring nature in. They're not designed to help you sleep, because often they're waking you up multiple times during the night, whether it's a nursing shift change or with all the blinking and beeping sounds and lights, or they're just checking to make sure you're checking your vitals, whatever it is.
Right.
And so if people are trying to recover, they're not getting good sleep. They're not able to experience nature, which we know helps people recover from all sorts of things. And then there's all this noise, which is stress. And it seems like a lot of the healthcare professionals have a lot of stress. So, as you were creating the Point Retreats, what I've experienced is you go into the lifestyle medicine, you bring in the nature, you're helping with sleep, and you're really trying to control stress. Like your team might be a little bit stressed of like running around making things happen, but to the people experiencing the retreat, I think that's one of the things that I really love about it is it's like a calming environment to be in, and for a healthcare professional to start to see what it's like to not be stressed and to have all this calm, like it's really powerful. So it seems like you built that in intentionally as well.
Yes. No, it was very intentional. It's interesting, sometimes you have to speak people's language to help them understand what you're trying to do. And so we've softly put in lifestyle medicine, and we've softly put in a lot of things, not trying to hide it per se, but just trying to help kind of make it less foreign, I guess, to people. And lifestyle medicine is becoming more common. I mean, clearly it's become a much more organized, segment of medicine, although it still is rarely inside healthcare. So, I mean, as a nurse, I think I had like 1 hour of nutrition. It was basically like drink more milk. And, for physicians, I just did a presentation and put in a slide where the average physician has 7,000 to 8,000 hours of medical training, of which maybe 20 of those at best in some of the top schools are related around nutrition. And when that's nutrition, it's not even like applicable nutrition. It's not applied nutrition. It's, more like biochemical, like nutrition. So,
and is that what lifestyle medicine is? It's like nutrition, stress, like can you talk a little bit about, because I don't think we answered the question of what it is.
I know we kind of just skirted around that. So, I mean, nutrition is the core component of that. It's movement, it's sleep, it's restoration. I mean, it's kind of all of like our pillars, right? It's community. So it's how you live your life from sun up to sundown, right? So it's all of those touch points that can either deter or promote disease. So food is probably like 80% of lifestyle medicine. But I think stress management is moving on up there, as is, sleep, as is movement. But it's just really looking at how you can use your own lifestyle to mitigate, prevent, or promote disease, your own course. We all have genetic SNPs that can be turned on or kept off, and lifestyle plays a huge role in that. So it's really just helping people understand, based on general guidelines and then really specific guidelines, what they can do to help mitigate their body's own biology and propensity to steer away from disease.
Christa, one of the things I was thinking about as I hear you guys talking is the dire statistics of third shift workers. And I know we have a friend in common in California, Chan. I'll just say Chan. She's awesome. She was really doing some cool biohacks around, working third shift and whatever. I think I heard something or read something even today that the third shift workers, like their life expectancy, it was like, I think it said 15 years less than normal. That was shocking to me. I was like, what? 15 years? You guys, that's kind of crazy.
Yeah. No, that's probably pretty
so?
accurate. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Well, if you look at the studies, who do they study for, like cancer studies and for, your circadian rhythms? It's it's night, it's night and evening nurses.
Right.
Yeah.
So just for our listeners, thinking about when you started the Point Retreats. So these are the type of people that you were looking to be like, hey, this is a place where you can come and restore your health, because you're like, it's just a weird conundrum. Like you're putting your health at risk. Isn't it a weird conundrum? You're putting your health at risk to take care of other people in the sick care system.
Yeah.
So like, maybe you need some time.
Yeah.
That dog.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So do you see movement on that? Like, are third shift nurses starting to do more in like maybe, switch off shifts, or I don't know. Is there a remedy for that?
Yeah. And it's hard because it's, it's one of those few businesses where it is 24/7 and you cannot get away from that. Right. So you have to have people covering the night shift. To answer your question, I'd say the efforts are probably minimal. It's actually, most nurses who have worked evenings or nights, it's actually more challenging, and you can probably both appreciate this, to be flip-flopping between days and nights. You almost have to like reset your whole circadian rhythm to be up at night and sleep in the day. So it's really tricky when you move between shifts on your body. So I would say there are pockets of it that I see, but it is still an anomaly. It's still not the norm. And it is really, really tough on one's health to work nights. I mean, there are some people that seemingly can do it better than others. But I think at the end of the day, it still takes a toll. But in all honesty, healthcare just takes a toll on most people working in healthcare for all the reasons you just said. I mean, I just had dinner last night with a director of integrative medicine at our VA hospital, and we were just kind of laughing because we were nurses once upon a time together in our early days. And the hospital's like the worst place for healing ever. I mean, I'm like, even for, when we've tried to do different mini retreats in the hospital, it's so hard to have people's sympathetic systems come down enough to really get the benefit, because there's still the white coats, and there's still the beeps, and there's still the code blues, and there's still the code greens, and the smells, and the ambulance sounds. And it's like, it's so hard for healthcare workers to escape that internally. So I think that's why, we could have probably done nothing half the time at the Point retreats, and people just would come up and be like, oh, this is great. Just because it's quiet, right? It's peaceful. It's it's day and night from what you get in the hospital. So we can't get by without it. We have to have healthcare systems. We need hospitals. Healthcare is one of the few things I can say with absolute certainty everybody will use in their lifetime, at least once, probably multiple times. And our healthcare systems, it's kind of the quiet public health crisis that's happening right now. I just read a statistic, half of healthcare professionals are planning on actively leaving. And this means every arena in our workforce is actively seeking to leave within the next 1 to 5 years.
I think you mentioned that statistic at one of the retreats, and that is a little scary.
Yeah.
So that means like more than half of the healthcare workers that are serving us, hopefully not us, but if you go to the emergency room, or you go to the hospital, or a loved one has to go, like you're being I don't want to say catered to, but you're being cared for, trying to think of the right word, by somebody who wants to leave their job because they hate it.
Yeah.
That's kind of scary.
It is scary.
And it seems like the system itself isn't supporting us, men and women, in becoming healthier and keeping us healthy. And it's not supporting the people that work in the system to do the work for the people that need the care.
Right.
And so it's like failing everyone all around. And so that's what I love about what you did, is you started this business, the Point Retreats, and your goal is to help the healthcare professional become less stressed and learn about things like lifestyle medicine and alternatives that they can integrate into their own practices for themselves. And if they find out for themselves that something works, like then they're more likely to advocate bringing those into their systems to help patients, which is great. Yeah. So I was just thinking about what you had said earlier on, third shift too. And one of the things that I heard is for third shift or night shift, one of the things you can do, so if you're listening to this and you're a night shift worker, whether it's in healthcare or, a factory or manufacturing, whatever it is, one of the best things you can do is switch to not work night shift. But the fact is, like, we need people working night shift in the society we have. So somebody's got to do it. The next best thing, other than changing your shift to an earlier shift, is to do it for like 3 to 4 months and then switch to a day shift for 3 to 4 months, because the switching within the same week or week to week is so disruptive on your circadian rhythm and is actually a human carcinogen. So according to the World Health Organization, night shift work is a probable human carcinogen. So it's right up there with lead and asbestos in terms of carcinogenicity, which is crazy. So we know it's like can cause cancer, and we still need people to do it.
Yeah.
So if there's some way to set it up, and a lot of the doctors are open to this, but if you're listening to this, you have to ask. You have to tell someone this is what you want, because they're not just going to come out and do it for you. To be on that night shift for a period of time and to switch to a day shift for a period of time that is a long enough period of time to resync your circadian rhythm to normalcy. And that can be really helpful. So with that said, how did you decide, Christa, that this was what you wanted to do? And how did you know it was the right thing to do?
Yeah. Good question. I knew healthcare professionals in particular, and there's a lot of people. I mean, this is just my industry, right? They don't have a lot of access, ironically, to places that promote their own health. And I'll go back to something you said, when you got to the ER and you're like, well, we're being cared for by people who hate their job. Actually, healthcare professionals love what they do. Like, they genuinely, the majority of them want to be there and they sincerely want to take care of people. It's just that the system doesn't set them up for success in that model. So then they just, suffer from their own burnout, their own chronic diseases, their own fatigue. And you guys, we've been parents, right? How hard is it when you're sick to take care of your own kids, right? And so it's like, that's a little bit of the best analogy I can make. There's a degree of illness in almost every healthcare professional right now. And when I say illness, it's diagnosable as like, fatigue syndrome, right? Chronically elevated cortisol levels. I mean, it's all these other things that people might look at as soft, but they're all the things that are precursors to disease. But they have to go in and still continue to take care of people. And, on one end, I'm like, thank God they do. But I'm like, okay, but what are we doing to sustain this? Like, we need to have a sustainable healthcare workforce. And in all honesty, no one has been able to come up with a plan to solve this problem. There are very few healthcare systems that do this well. I can think of a couple, but they're few and far between. So I'm reading Elon Musk's book right now, and I'd like to write him a letter and be like, that's really nice that you want to send people to space, but could you fix healthcare first? I'm like, can someone really smart just come in and do this? Because nobody has been able to do it. And interestingly enough, and I can share more of this about this with both of you as time goes on, but as we sold the Point Peninsula and we're kind of morphing and changing, the Point is still going to do what it continues to do, but it's going to be...
So I think what people don't know is the Point Retreats was a destination retreat, and it was on a really beautiful lake in northern Minnesota, 3 cabins, very luxurious. And when you went to a Point Retreat, so anyone can sign up for the public. There were retreats tailored to healthcare professionals and non-professionals. You would be at one of these homes. You would stay in one of these homes, sleep in the homes, eat in the homes, and the retreats were there. We're in nature. And that center has been sold, but the Point Retreats still goes on.
Yes.
So
thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah. And we've found other beautiful locations. We're looking at new destination locations. But I've developed a new umbrella company, and the Point Retreats will be one of the service lines under it. And it's going to be more all-encompassing around really serving our healthcare professional population and trying to foster and build more intrinsic health within them that they actually actively and truly need. And this is going to take a lot of collaboration with our healthcare systems. So, I have to be really mindful that I still need to have a lot of buy-in, but I'm actually relying on them for zero funding and $0. And we're going to come at it from a totally different angle and build something that's, I'm going to kind of try and get the community involved in this to understand that this is actually a cause and a mission that really needs more attention, because we're all going to be impacted by it at some point someday. And try and in my own little way make a mark in this space in an even more critical way. So I'm really excited about it, but I know I have, and I had to have a little talk with myself before I decided to take this on. But I had about 3 or 4 different healthcare leaders and physicians ask if I would help grow these particular areas. And I'm like, you know what, let's just take this all together and we're going to make this a bigger umbrella company and mission and movement. And we're going to actually really make an impact. And it's going to take some significant energy, resources and time, but this is going to be like my last leadership push. And I hope I can leave and be like, all right, Mark is in motion, and then let the next generation take it over and keep carrying on the work.
Who needs Elon Musk when you're already doing it? So.
Well, I would say I still could use an Elon Musk, but thank you.
That's awesome. Krista, a while back, I was with a group of people, and we were going to start a new school in Northeast Minneapolis.
Yeah.
And one of the things that the director of our Polytechnic school said to me that really hit home, he was like, we're not interested in reformation.
Yeah.
We are starting over.
Yeah.
And he's like, there's no reforming this system. And he was talking about the school systems in Minneapolis in particular. And I think like some of the statistics were like, North Minneapolis was graduating 40%.
Yeah.
40%.
Wow.
Like
That's
other
alarming.
kids. Like
Yeah.
it was astonishing once you like actually saw those numbers. And Northeast was not much better than that. And there was a lot of politics that were involved, and our school never opened because I would say there's some things that weren't supposed to be. But I just thought like the part where he was like, we're going to start over. There's no reform, right? Like, are you kind of doing that same thing, or are you still, is the water a little more muddy?
Sure.
In that.
It's actually a really good point to bring up, Heidi, is I had dinner with a teacher, a friend of mine, on Friday night, and she recently took a leave of absence 110% due to burnout. And when we host these retreats more focused on self-care and burnout, we almost always have 1 or 2 educators who kind of knock on our door and say, well, can we come too? And I'm like, oh, of course. I mean, the door is open to anybody. It's just, an audience we tend to attract is healthcare professionals. But I hear this over and over. The burnout rate of our education system is almost like parallel to healthcare, right? And again, it's one of those things. Well, what happens to our society if we have this mass exodus of teachers? I mean, we are in a whole hell of a lot of trouble when that happens, as we are in healthcare. So rumor on the inside street of healthcare is we're on the brink of a collapse. Can it be reformed? I think there will be an element of it having to have a reformation because we can never stop it. We can't pause it, right? So we can never have this moment where I think, we all sometimes need a week or 2 or a month where we just need to like withdraw or go inward to really be like, okay, how can I do this different? And you can't stop healthcare because it's in constant need and demand. So it's going to take a lot of creativity. Is it possible? Yes. It's a very complex problem, as I'm sure the education system is also, and I would have no clue where to start there, and I honor the people that are trying. But what I can tell you about healthcare is it's going to take a shift in consumer demand. So I think consumers need to start asking/demanding for something different. They often will do only what insurance covers, which is understandable, right? Cost and accessibility is a real concern. And I think we need to reform our insurance systems to also cover more integrative medicine. We have the research and the data now. This is not alternative medicine. This is good medicine. Lifestyle medicine and integrative medicine is good medicine. And so most of us in healthcare intrinsically want to see people get as well as possible. So let's make some of the tools more accessible, more implementable. And just because they might not have the same RVU return on dollar doesn't mean that they can't reduce cost. So I see healthcare systems so motivated by revenue because they often, at least in Minnesota, are nonprofits running a really thin profit margin. I mean, they're not overly profitable. There are for-profit hospitals and for-profit clinics that are more profitable. But again, you're really driven by profit. And at some point, it's that tough spot with healthcare where you're dealing with life and death. Nobody wants to attach a dollar to that, but somebody does. But then unfortunately, it's often our insurance companies who are dictating what kind of care that is. And the majority of our dollars are spent in the last segment of people's lives, instead of it being in the first half of people's lives when we could really teach people how to be healthy and well in a much greater capacity. We save most of our resources for like last ditch efforts that 9 out of 10 times the ending is still the same. And so we have to really try as best as we can, from a financial perspective, from a policy perspective, from protocols, from algorithms, to stop going from being reactive to equally value being proactive. Where right now, everything in medicine is when this goes wrong, we do this. When this goes wrong, we do this. When this goes wrong, we do this. And sometimes all you can do is put Band-Aids on things, and that's as good as you can get sometimes. But we can do, I really do believe we can do better than that.
I feel like when you were just about to say the insurance company thing, like I feel like, oh my God, they play such a huge part in, I just went to the dentist and I was like, oh, it can cover this and it will only do this and you can only get this. And I'm like, really? Like what? I was, surprised. And I also think, what about lawyers?
Yeah.
Lawyers also play such a huge part in what it almost feels like shackles, right? Mm-hmm. Because you can't do this or you'll get sued. You can't do, it's like the white elephant in the room again. What is like, it feels like between those two entities, they kind of run that whole system when it really comes down to it.
Yeah, it does. And, consumers are starting to demand more wellness, integrative care, which is great. It starts there. If that's going to move the needle on patient satisfaction scores, then healthcare systems will start to listen. Right. But it's such a big, complex beast, right? But insurance companies play a huge role in dictating medicine. And that's one of the reasons, I don't know if you saw it in the Wall Street Journal, at Allina Healthcare System, a group of the physicians in Allina Healthcare created the first physician union because they were so dissatisfied with the hospital telling them and insurance companies telling them how they couldn't. And oftentimes it going against their compass of what was really good medicine. And they were like, intrinsically, we can't do this anymore. So they literally had to form a union to protect themselves from that.
Wow, that's amazing. It just made me think of, I was talking to a woman and she was talking about a school that was a private school. I think it was a private school in Minneapolis. And the kids were going to go out and climb a tree.
Yeah.
All the parents had to sign a waiver before they were able to climb the tree. Mm-hmm. And it just makes me think, what? You can't go just do anything anymore. Mm-hmm. Like, it's just it's so insane in the world. Yeah. And I don't know. I don't really have a point with that, but it was just made me think of that.
Yeah.
Paint that picture. I don't know.
Yes. But maybe you were making the analogy of, do physicians feel bound by liability in what they do and don't do? Yes. And nurses and everyone else in between and in there. And the answer is yes. That happens. People can sue. And the other thing I think people don't realize about medicine is there's humans behind it, right? On both sides, patients and clinicians. And patients do a lot of things that do not help their own health, and clinicians sometimes make mistakes. And that's just the reality of having a human human-run business. There are those weird pockets that, of course, get a lot of visibility where someone's like intentionally doing harm, but those are sociopaths, basically. That's not your average person. So most people really intentionally want to do right by the patient and provide the best care possible. And sometimes you're still going to get sued. And that is hard. Liability is a real thing. It really, especially in medicine, because it's often very life and death. So of course that's resonating in people's minds. You both know I've been on airplanes where I seem to have medical crises happen all the time. And I always have a little voice in me that has to go, if I step in, and there are certain laws that protect you when you step in, but if things don't go well, I realize that someone could be like, well, she should have done this and she didn't do that. And hopefully it would hold up in a court of law, but you never know.
I know my daughter was it last year you were going to come to the Pyramid Retreat?
Yes.
And Artie was like, wait, do I have to fly with Christa? Because she had that experience with you.
She did last time she flew. I just flew with one of my physician friends. And she's like, I am taking different flights. And she literally took different flights. And I'm like, no. I actually could use you at this one. So step on in. But
Christa seems to run into medical emergencies on flights. So people don't want to fly with Christa because something crazy could happen.
It could happen. So far, my track record is everyone's gotten to the ground, and Delta's up to their, they now have a chief well-being officer at Delta who actually sends out nice emails to healthcare professionals who step in and try and help. And I was like, oh, look at this. This is so nice. Yeah.
So I think one of the important things that you said that I tell people in my company all the time is if you want something like alternative or integrative healthcare or nature brought into the healthcare space or different types of lighting for circadian rhythm, you have to ask for it. And the more people asking, the easier it is to justify doing those things. So I encourage everyone listening, ask for those things that you want. Tell your physician or your doctor or the hospital about it, because that just makes it that much easier when more people ask for it to actually get done. And so if you don't speak up, don't think that anything's going to happen that you want because you're not telling anybody.
Yep, that is such a great point. And you're so right. And what's happening now, and I appreciate your focus of like, what do people do to stay in tough environments, right? And healthcare is a tough environment, and most people are trying to survive it. And there's also a mass exodus happening. So how do you stay in it if you feel like, this is where I need to be? And being a voice, advocating for yourself, getting colleagues, advocate, and, do some self-studying. Like, what could we do in this environment? And there are things, as, we all know, that you can do. So stop filling our vending machines with, terrible horseshit food. Stop, keeping all the lights on 24/7 and really time your interventions with your patients as long as there's nothing emergent happening to be at minimum for both you and for the patient. Wear blue blockers at appropriate times to set your body up to be able to sleep when your shift is done, no matter when it is. And there are hospitals that are bringing in like these beautiful atriums. They're building the hospital around these beautiful atriums of trees and plants. So you can step out for a minute and feel like you're breathing something more natural than just this oxygen, this artificial chemical smelling air throughout the hospital. So there are things that you can do, but you're right. It's going to take consumers, healthcare professionals demanding it, and then leaders who are willing to listen. And they may not be able to solve everything, but starting to do some things to mitigate the dangers of the profession that are very, very real, not only from the environment, but just from communicable diseases you're exposed to, from, you see patients on their worst day. Family members can get very emotional and sometimes abusive, and so can patients. So that's the reality of the profession.
Yeah, my mom is a nurse practitioner now, but back when I was growing up, a nurse, and I still to this day, when I was sick, I had to go to work with my mom because there's a bunch of nurses and I couldn't stay home because I was too young and we didn't have anyone else that I could be watched by, right? And so I still remember to this day the smell of nitrogen, because where she worked was at this oral surgeon's place, and so they would use nitrous to put people under before they would give them the IVs of the anesthetic. And so the whole office just nonstop, when you're like all the smells and you need to get out in nature, like all it smelled like was nitrous the whole time. And I can pick out that smell in a medical office anywhere. And like anytime I think of a medical office, that's the first thing that comes up in my mind, is like all they are breathing is like this excess nitrous that was vented off from the patients all day. It was very strange. So
everyone was
smell.
half high,
which
also makes for a really good experience, right?
Teenager, that is, or
I was young. I was too young for that.
But yeah, you've lived it. You've watched your mom, live through all the different positions that she's had and kind of the evolution of medicine in her, career. And I'm sure you've witnessed and seen things that, kind of made you think differently about healthcare, even as a young person.
Yeah, and the third shift. So she would work night shift on weekends. So she would work all during the week, normal day shifts. And then Friday, Saturday, night shift. And that just messes up your circadian rhythm so much. So she struggled quite a bit trying to make enough money, because she got paid at that time, back in the 80s, quite a bit more working a night shift on the weekend in the emergency room than you would in a normal. She worked radiology, hematology, and it was much different when you work night shift and work in the emergency room. So
it is very different, yes. And, to that point, I will say, there's a lot of things that you still can do to mitigate that. But one of the things I would love to see them change in healthcare, and I'll bring up a couple of points, is in healthcare. I just interviewed the chief wellbeing officer for a large healthcare system in the Twin Cities, and he was a huge advocate for no longer mandating that a healthcare professional had to put any kind of diagnosis of depression, anxiety, or panic on their applications. You used to have to report that, and you still do in half the states in our country. And so what happens then is healthcare professionals who kind of almost inevitably feel some anxiety at times, life and death, 24/7, all the things, but they don't feel like they can talk about it because fear of retribution, that you could lose your job. Second to that is you think of all the other professions that are constantly making life and death decisions, like airline pilots, truck drivers, right? They're not making life and death decisions, but if they drive too long, they could create a life and death scenario. There is no cap in healthcare, no cap. So your mom, if she would have stayed there 24/7 her whole weekend, they probably would have been like, great, because we're short-staffed. Same with physicians. I mean, there's intrinsically units, leaders try and put some, parameters around that, but really there's no mandatory caps.
So that's like where our pilot, we were delayed an hour leaving for our last flight a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
Because the pilot had a mandatory minimum amount of time he had to sleep.
Yeah.
And he was still sleeping. So he couldn't come to our flight till later. Mm-hmm. And you're saying in healthcare, like, there's none of that. Like, you're going to be a surgeon, you're just up all night. They don't care about that. And not that they don't care, but they don't have mandatory, like, you need to go rest.
Right. And some of it is, in some of those, like, really specialized areas, like if you're a neurosurgeon or whatnot. I mean, you're on call and your partners need a break too. And so that's their way of trying to mitigate it. But it doesn't matter if you've just done a 10-hour surgery and if another person is helicoptered in, I mean, you got to go. And same with nursing. I used to work a lot of evening shifts when our kids were little, so we could avoid some, as much daycare as possible. And so many times, almost 9 out of 10 shifts, they'd say, can you stay and work a double overnight? And I would negotiate and say, fine, I'll work the double, but then I'm not coming in the next night. And by 3 or 4 in the morning, I'm like on hour 16, and I'm like, looking at the patient, like, could you just move over a little bit so I can lay down? I need to sleep too. And then they would still call me the next night to come in. I'm like, I literally just worked like 17, 18 hours. You do not want me to come. And they're like, no, we do. I'm like, no, you don't. So it's so interesting. We will take the most sleep-deprived, unhealthy, half-present healthcare professional versus protecting them, saving them, making it a sustainable workforce, a sustainable hour, sustainable job. And there are changes we could make. They're not easy, I get it, but we could make them.
Join us on the other side of the paid membership for the continuation of the discussion with Christa. Also, we forgot to ask Christa to let you all know where to find her and the Point Retreats. You can go to thepointretreats.com, sign up for the newsletter to be in the know on all the retreats they have coming up, as well as explore the retreats currently on offer and sign up for retreats. That's thepointretreats.com. And you can find them at Point Retreats on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Join Christa at any of the retreats that they have for the year over at the website, thepointretreats.com. Sign up for their newsletter and find them on social media. The conversation with Nurse Christa continues on the other side of the membership. Just go to howtoescapecorporate.substack.com, where you can become a member for just $9 a month.
If you want to be a corporate escape artist, head on over to howtoescapecorporate.com and sign up for the How to Escape Corporate Without Leaving Your Job course. Learn the exact methods to go from employee to entrepreneur. Turn your corporate existence into a corporate wonderland. It's time to take action. howtoescapecorporate.com. Remember, members get the full-length podcast over at howtoescapecorporate.substack.com. Become a member for $8 a month for the full podcast and members-only articles and videos.